So I'm not a big wine drinker, and I've only been to one winery, so please go easy on me when I do this illustration. But if you go to a winery, you will see row after row of green vines being rooted into the earth and reaching up towards the sun. And I'm always struck whenever I went to that one that I saw all of these trellises, because you never see a vine growing wild on the ground. It always has some sort of support structure underneath it. And I can't help but think of Jesus' teaching then, when he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. The soul is like a branch in a vine. And we too need a trellis in order to grow. And in the Christian tradition, that is called a rule of life. Over the last 5 teachings, we have set before you a vision of apprenticeship to Jesus, and now we're ready to shift gears a bit and make a plan to turn that vision into reality. Transformation is possible, but we've seen it's not inevitable. It won't just happen to you. We need a plan. Pete Scazzaro says, nurturing a growing spirituality with depth in our present-day culture will require a thoughtful, conscious, intentional plan for our spiritual lives. And this makes sense for most of the things we value. Most of us might have a plan for our money. Well, that's called a budget. Most of us have a plan for our time. That's called a schedule. Many of us have planned for our career, summer vacation, or an exercise routine, but not necessarily for apprenticeship to Jesus. Sometimes we just wing that. But the question is, how do we make a plan to be spiritually formed? Well, the answer, again, as first followers of Jesus came up with, is what they called a rule of life. Now, a rule of life is a schedule. It's a set of practices, relational rhythms that create space for us to, again, be with Jesus, become like him, do as he did. It is a plan to slow down your life, to simplify it around being formed. And rule of life is an ancient language, so it might sound really strange or even off-putting to modern ears. But again, I did not say rules for life, I said a rule of life. The original Latin word was regula, or is regula, which means rule. It's where we get the word regular, regulation, where we get ruler. It literally means a straight piece of wood. And some scholars think this word was used in the ancient Mediterranean for a trellis. Which then makes John 15 make so much more sense when you read that in context. Let's read it again. Jesus says, I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. Ouch. If you remain in me and my words in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory. Here it is, that you bear fruit and show yourselves to be his disciples. So early Christian teachers, they picked up on Jesus' metaphor and followed it to its logical conclusion. For a vine, listen, to bear fruit, as Jesus says, what does it need? A trellis, a support structure to lift it off the ground, to guide it towards a direction, to guard it from damage, from disease, from dangerous predators. If we are going to, quote, abide in the vine, quote, bear much fruit, we need a trellis. We need a support structure, and that is exactly what a rule of life is. Do you understand our logo now? It is very much a trellis. It is a way to schedule into your life relational rhythms that align our time and habits to our deepest desires, which are what? To become like him, to be with him. Now, the motivation behind a rule of life is not duty, it's desire. Think of the way that an athlete disciplines themselves daily or a musician disciplines themselves daily. And it's all in service of a deeper desire. They know they have to connect their desires to daily disciplines if they want to see what they're working for become a reality. Make sense? In the same way, for apprentices of Jesus, then a rule of life are daily, weekly, monthly practices that we organize our life then around God. Daily practices, thinking of like spending your day in prayer or scripture, weekly, keeping Sabbath, gathering with the community, monthly, serving the poor, preaching the gospel, and so on. And it's all of these practices that we intentionally, repeatedly do to offer ourselves to God for transformation. It is an intentional plan for discipleship. And I'll be honest with you, in the chaos of life, with all of the hurry, digital distraction, y'all, we need this now more than ever. It is an ancient idea, but its time has come again. So you may love this concept, you may be a pretty structured person, or you may have a visceral reaction already to an idea of a schedule around Jesus, especially if you are a more spontaneous and fun-loving personality. I can't relate to that. Or if you come out of a legalistic background and just cringe at any talk of discipline. But here's the thing, and listen, this is really important. You already have a rule of life. Whether it's written or unwritten, conscious or subconscious, wise or foolish, whether it's based on a long-term vision or short-term gratification, whether it's moving you toward your desired destination or sabotaging your best intentions. And even if you haven't even heard of the phrase rule of life until 6 minutes ago, you have one. We all do. We have a way in which we live. We have a morning routine. We have a typical day. We have a network of relationships. We have, again, maybe not a budget, things we spend our time on, and so on. So the question is this. It's not, do you have a rule of life? It's, do you know what your rule of life is? And is it giving you the life you desire? Is it working for you or against you? Y'all, many of us feel far from God much of the time. We are always in a hurry. We are stuck in discipleship. We're still living and wounding from our past or dysfunctional patterns in our present. The problem isn't that your rule of life isn't working. It actually is. You and I are being formed for better or for worse by, again, a choice architecture of our lives, by the habits, relationships, environments we saw unintentionally that just happened to us, by our rule of life. So then how do we make a plan? How do we make a rule for our formation? Let me say this first, okay? Everything we do at Eden is invitational. As the great prophet Dennis Morton from Peloton once said, we make suggestions, you make decisions. But if you're ready to take that next step in your apprenticeship to Jesus, let me give you a few tips as you work on a rule of life. Number one, start small. It is really easy to get overexcited and overreach. Where are my Enneagram 1s, 3s, and 8s at? Okay, yep. That one in the crowd. I am an 8, and I overreach all the time. It is a strategy doomed to fail. When it comes to our spiritual life, as a general rule, start where you are, not where you think that you should be. We must find God in the contours of ordinary life, not the life maybe we used to have, or the life that we wish that we had, but the life that you actually have. I love this by Tish Harrison Warren. She's an Anglican priest. She has this great line in her book, Liturgy of the Ordinary. But she says we must learn to love Jesus in our actual life. So start wherever you are. For most of us, that means small, with what psychologists call tiny habits, small, easy, joyful practices for life in God. A full hour every morning in prayer before you touch your phone might be ideal, but that might be too big of a leap. So start with 15 minutes or 10 minutes or 2 minutes. Just start somewhere. Number 2, think subtraction, not addition. Take out more than you put in. Again, I think a lot of the journey with Jesus is just learning to do less, which is a paradox. But it is tempting, again, to do all of these things for God, to write a rule as a list of things to do. And that's, again, it's not all bad. It's just important to make a list, though, sometimes of what we're not going to do. Honestly, a rule of life is not about doing more, but it's about doing less. It's about ruthlessly eliminating hurry from your life. It's, for example, learning to slow down, to maybe repurpose time spent on your phone for prayer, or trying to knock out chores during the week so you can actually take a full day off to delight in God. I love this commercial by Progressive Insurance where it's this guy talking about how to help people not become their parents. And one of his big things is like, guys, yard work is not fun. It is work. Okay, watching your neighbor root out a tree and carry that off is not a fun thing. That is actually work. That is chores. So it's learning again into the normal part of our lives to do the things that need to get done so that we can play, so that we can have fun, so that we can rest. Number 3, take a balanced approach. So you can plot the practices of Jesus along a 4-axis point graph. Again, on this x-axis, I was like, what is middle school math? Okay, x-axis here. On the left are things that you might do alone. On the right are things you might do in community. At the top are things that like you abstain from, things you're not doing. So think like solitude. And then engagement might be things like justice or weekly meal and community. The thing is, naturally we are drawn to some practices and shy away from others. And that's totally normal. Just make sure you design a rule that covers the range of your formation that's not just based on personality. But with that said, consider your personality, your season of life, and where you are actually at with Jesus. You are uniquely you. Don't work against that. If you're more introverted like myself, or you like engaging your mind, then carve out plenty of time to read or reflect. If you're more extroverted, don't know what that feels like, or action-oriented, prioritize doing meaningful things with other people. And some of us need way more certain practices than others. This is known as upstream versus downstream. So think of a river, okay? If you are going downstream with a river, are you having to work very hard? No, but if you're going upstream, it is laborious. Same with practices. Downstream ones are things you love, things you find joy in, things that are easy to do. But upstream are the ones that are laborious. We hate these. These are the hardest ones for us, but they are the most transformative. The key here is you need both. Probably more downstream than upstream, but you do need both. And again, consider the season of life that you're in. I love this again by Tish Harrison Warren, who is also a mother of 3. She said the longing for a contemplative ideal can be a particular burden for me as a young mom. In a home that is typically loud and active and sleepless and filled with unending requests and needs. So don't fight against whatever season you're in, and also don't be upset with it. You are where you are right now. Work with it. Remember, and this is from, what is that book? Monastic Monastery? Is that? Domestic Monastery. Yep, close. The whole premise of that is, remember, your kids can actually be like monastic bells to remind you that your time is not your own. Every interruption can function as an invitation to surrender control and become a person of love. And there'll be seasons, we talked about this when we talked about suffering, where you might experience a dark night of the soul and the practices don't work like they used to. And you don't feel God's presence like you used to. That is a part of the journey. It is a normal experience. Okay, you with me? This is a bit more lecture-y, I know, but it is important stuff. We are almost there. Number 5, consider the J curve. Learning theorists point out that learning any new skill, any new skill, there's the middle Georgia, follows a J-shaped curve. When you attempt to grow in a skill, so for example, like playing piano, or like one of our practices like Sabbath, you often get worse before you get better. This has happened a lot for me with the drums over the years. I have had long seasons of playing and not playing where I lose the muscle memory. When I pick it back up, I'm actually worse. But in time, I think, start sounding better. Same with things like Sabbath. Okay, I've always had days off, but never intentional days off. And when I give myself to it, I find myself fidgety. I find myself anxious if I'm not working. It feels like a waste of time. All of these questions come up like, am I doing a good job? Am I doing enough? Those questions are just not helpful. Resist the urge to critique and overthink. Just stick with it and let God do his work. Follow the J curve and then up. Number 6, 2 more. There is no formation without repetition. Okay, that great line by James Houston, formation is the slowest of all human movements. This one is really hard for us and feels like nails on a chalkboard on our nervous system because we are instant gratification generation. But over time, practices do have a cumulative effect. Did anybody see Karate Kid? Yeah? So that great scene with Mr. Miyagi, a lot of times it feels like we are just waxing Mr. Miyagi's car or pounding nails into a dojo edition, but actually we are becoming a karate master. It is the same. Sometimes it might just feel like we're spending another day in prayer, nothing's happening, or trying to take a day off, or coming to church, but actually we are becoming like Jesus. We just have to stick with it, finding joy in our ordinary life. And finally, and I think this is probably the most important, we have to do this with others. It is easy to think that crafting a rule of life is something I do, like I write my rule, and that's not bad. Again, you already have a rule. So anything that brings you more intentionally to Jesus is powerful. But historically, a rule of life was for community. It was designed to hold a community together around shared rhythms. And following a rule in community can change everything. So for Eden, we are forming a church family around a collective rule of life. For us, we believe there are 9 spiritual practices that we think are essential to following Jesus in our place and time. I'm not going to go through them all, but these core practices form a trellis for us. We started at the very beginning of this teaching series with our core identity statement, practicing the way of Jesus together for the renewal of Charlotte. A rule of life is how we do that, okay? That is how we make that happen. Because there's something about starting Sabbath, not just by yourself, but for example, maybe a meal in community. That just makes it way more joyful. Or slugging it out together and fasting. And once a week, maybe with your band, pulling that money that you would have spent on food to give to a local food bank. It's just better with others, okay? Lecture over. This week, here's what I would encourage you to do. Some of you maybe have already done this if you are in a band, but the practice this week is to utilize the Rule of Life Builder by practicing the way. I will link this in the email. I'll link all those tips as well. Again, some of you maybe have already done this, but it's in bands that we ask each other, where are you seeing resistance or delight? How can we support you? Again, this is best done in community. And you'll also notice that there are 9 practices. Again, these are our core practices. And you'll also notice there's 3 categories. There's daily rhythms, weekly, and then monthly or seasonally. But this one section down here called other practices, this is for the whole of your life. This is where, for example, I put like therapy sessions, doctor visits, just did my annual physical, all is good. I think, I can't read my blood tests, but neither here or there. This is where I do diet or exercise, sleep goals. I'm trying hydration goals now. So this is what all of that goes to, okay? Other practices, again, because you're not just a body, but you're also not just a soul. You are a mind, heart, body complex wired for love. To close, you might be feeling all sorts of things, overwhelmed, inspired, maybe bored, but just a reminder, and I love this from Margaret Gunther, who is a wife, mother, Anglican priest. She says, a good rule can set us free to be our true and best selves. It is a working document, a kind of spiritual budget. Listen, it is not carved in stone. It is subject to regular review and revision. It should support us, not constrict us. I have been actively living by a rule for about 3 years now, and I can honestly say that statement is 100% true. It has been messy. It has changed a lot. I have felt guilt. I have felt joy. I've wondered if I was even a Christian at times. But when I have been consistent, I have felt like this side of the resurrection, I have become or been my best and truest self. I've gotten a vision beyond just present circumstances. So I am inviting you on a journey that I've been taking for a while now, not as a way to boast, okay, but as a guide. Because I believe the best thing I can do as your pastor is to show you places I've been myself, not lead you to places that I have not been myself. I love what Annie Dillard says. She says, how we spend our days, of course, is how we spend our lives. What we do this hour and that one is what we're doing. A schedule defends from chaos and whim. It is a peace and a haven set into the wreck of time. It is a lifeboat on which you find yourself decades later still living. Following Jesus is not a formula, it's a friendship. But a rule of life is simply a way for you to put friendship with Jesus at the center, not off to the side. And through practices, we offer our whole life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And just a reminder, transformation is not your work, it's God's. You're really not in control of any of it. God does his way at his pace, but living by a rule is simply to say, God, here I am. Heal me, free me, transform me. I'm yours. So, Father, as we, as a church, journey together to build a trellis and to live by a trellis together, would you show us grace as we stumble forward together? God, I just pray against a spirit of competition. Yes, in a lot of ways, this is a race, but it's the kind of race that we're coming alongside one another and helping each other run, not blazing past one another. Help us to pick one another up when we stumble. Help us to encourage one another in love, exhorting one another towards good deeds. And help us to be the kind of church that you're calling us to live. Ones that don't just receive information, but want to put things into practice. Ones that want to seek renewal in the city by being with you. So God, I pray that for our church. May we love each other well. May we yield to your Spirit, Jesus. Amen.